I have a
uh,
question
two
here.
week 2 weeks ago, the last time I was here, I mentioned that I wanted to begin going through systematically actually a number of the traditional, sometimes we call them the traditional lists, but I think of them as the traditional structures or the traditional formats in which practice can be organized around to help support us in our Dharma practice. And I am going to begin to do that, but tonight I want to give a little foundational underpinning that is, I think, will be referenced throughout all of these. So what I mean by some of the traditional, I've been reflecting on it, and there's the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Some you'll have heard many of these, but some maybe not. Seven factors of enlightenment, five aggregates. These are models that can be used through which to connect with our own ourselves, our own experience, external experience. There's something called the five spiritual faculties. Also, same list is also called the five spiritual powers. Six sense bases, or sometimes called the six sense doors, is a powerful list. There's dependent origination, and there's a few others in there also. And I'd like to take maybe at least one evening, maybe a little more. And it's not that you have to remember these, but some people find that they might relate to one or more of these. Think of it as a system or methodology or a structure. And so you could approach just holding into mind, for example, the Four Noble Truths, and it can become very alive beyond an intellectual understanding and really help us experientially move right into what we call liberation through non-clinging. There is clinging helping us in letting go. And all of these other lists or forms can be very supportive too. So I will begin with that. Again, next week it'll be the retreat, but coming back the week after that, and we'll start in with those. But as I said, I would like to just pause a moment or back up, because all of these different ways of systematizing practice are really in service of the same thing. Some people find that at some point, all of these different forms and structures and systems can drop away, and we're just right there in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment unfolding or flow of our experience. And we're either resting in this, what I call the stream of non-clinging, stream of wakefulness, a lot of different words, stream of presence, or we're not. And when we're not, that's okay too, because that's what's happening in the moment. And then we know that, and we use the moment to help us let go. So we may not need a lot of the forms and structures, but I think for all of us, there will be times, maybe for all of our practice, when we want to bring in different, I call them different tools we have in our toolbox at different times. Underpinning it all, as I say, is this idea of this liberation through non-clinging. So I want to hang out here just a little bit. We talk about it a lot. I want to come at it from a particular perspective this evening. I heard in the news, I think it was just today or yesterday, that I didn't read the whole story, but the Republican Senate, well, he's no longer the majority leader, minority leader, Mitch McConnell. His wife is Elaine Chao, and I think many of you know, under Trump, she was the Treasury Secretary, and which to me always seemed like a conflict of interest, because her family owns this major, like, international shipping firm. And so a report just came out that found some fault with her and conflicts of interest around all of this. And so I didn't get into the story, whether they followed up or what happened on it. But what I was reflecting on about it is that I don't know what her age is, but she's not young. You look at Mitch McConnell, no, he's getting older. She's probably, getting older herself, and she's wealthy, and she's pretty set and settled in life. And so, but still, she is motivated. I don't want to use the word driven because I'm imputing certain motivations onto her, which I don't know. But certainly, she's still very engaged. There was a whole thing of what she was doing with and for her family's business and promoting it and all of this. And in my mind, I kind of thought, well, why? Do you need more money? What's motivating it? And it was more of, obviously it's a rhetorical question because it could be many motivations, and I don't know, and it's not really to judge. But what I, in my own reflection, I thought of, well, it's not like there's anything wrong. This is what people do, right? This is the sort of what humans do. We're engaged in doing and becoming and acquiring and the next thing and moving forward, right? And I don't know if anybody would say that's necessarily a bad thing. But at some point, we all, I guess the Dharma is asking us to stop and reflect on. So again, I want to get away from that particular example because that's just what started my mind thinking. And again, I don't know her, I don't know enough details, so that's not my point. But just in general, then as I brought it back into myself, I thought, well, what are all the things that like move me forward and are about acquiring and doing? And I remember I had a conversation when I do remember who it was. I won't name the person. He was a well-known Buddhist Dharma teacher who's written a lot of books. And it's a man. He was getting older himself, and he was working on his next book. And I was chatting with this person about it, and it's like, well, you've done a lot of books, and he's telling me it's a lot of work and it's a pain, but he wanted to do it. And I said, well, why? What's driving you? You're well known. I think you're okay financially. What he says? Oh, it's never enough. That's what he said. It's never enough, which I thought I appreciated the honesty, and it can kind of point to something in all of us. You think of, well, really, is that where we end up? It's just never enough. I mean, if that is the truth, then we want to acknowledge that, and that's the place to hang out and really feel the feeling of that and see, well, is that what we want? Is that the force we want to be impelling us forward? And I think for most of life, probably this idea, it gets into this Buddhist concept of becoming, and which I may say a little, actually a huge topic, so I can't get into too much, but it's this whole idea of, it's sort of becoming versus being in a way, where this becoming is creating ourselves and our world really into being, like adding meaning, making purpose, adding all this stuff on. I don't think we're going to stop doing that as human beings, and maybe I don't even know if it would be necessarily desirable, but we certainly want to hold it in the right perspective, because as there's what's the saying? It's something like foolishness or stupidity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting the different result. And I really love that saying. It's kind of a cliche, but I think that's in a sense the whole Dharma, actually. You could think of the whole Dharma as an invitation to look at our own lives and really do an inquiry and ask, well, how is it going? How's it working out for us? And of course, there's a certain amount of difficulty that comes with life, and we all may have certain physical challenges, difficulty, suffering, mental, in our life circumstances, and we want to validate and not be just dismiss real challenges and difficulties. But there's also a lot of suffering that we create in our minds. And I don't know if I would go so far as to say all our sufferings in our minds, but a lot when we pay attention. We can say more about this when we talk about the Four Noble Truths. Right there, when you start paying attention to this dukkha, suffering, it can be a real, rather than being a burden, it can turn into being a real teacher for us, because it's actually, when we find ourselves suffering, it's an invitation to look right there. And you don't even have to take it as an invitation, because in case you haven't noticed, if you work the way my mind works, and I think how most people I know, um, it'll just keep coming around. If there's something happening, a way we're being, a way we're acting, a way we're relating to things, and we don't see it, or we're not able to get clear about it, it keeps coming back. And if we can see it as our teacher, then it can show us a way to maybe stop doing the same thing over and over again, and maybe find a different path. And so all of these different methodologies or ways of systematizing the practice that we'll get into are just different ways to help shine the light of awareness on that exact process. And one way to think of it is, there's a word in Pali. You don't have to know Pali, but it's used a lot. You'll know when you hear the translations, but it's called nibbida. Nibbida. And it's got a lot of different translations. It can have disenchantment, dispassion. Sometimes it has the sense of just had enough, done with this. It can sometimes be translated as disgust. And I think that translation can be useful for some people at some times, but actually it sort of takes away from the meaning. I'm going to actually come back to that disgust aspect in just a moment. So I'll explain a little more about that. But it actually literally means, the word nibbida literally means without finding. Without finding, if you get to the etymology of the word. So what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of ways it's actually not understood in just one way, but one way I think about it is just to take that literally, without finding, that as experience is coming, anything that we would go for, at some point, when we start to see, we don't have to go into disgust, one of the translations I've just used, because in a way that has the sense of pushing away. It can actually be tinged with aversion. So we can bring in disgust, I suppose. I have never related to that so much myself, but I suppose for certain people, if there's a lot of craving around something, if I guess the idea is, if you can bring in an attitude of a disgust, maybe it can help break the craving. So some of you who maybe relate to that personally more might say more about it. I know that's kind of the idea with that translation. I personally find that it lands a little differently for me, that it seems the word disgust is tinged with aversion, and it has this pushing away. And that's different than setting down. And a setting down or a letting go of is a different kind of thing. And that really gets more into, instead of disgust, it's more like done with, if you will. Not done with in pushing away or throwing away, but done with the chasing after the cycle of being driven by our likes and dislikes. That's the kind of letting go, and making the shift between seeking our well-being or our happiness, if you will, in getting my way, having what I want, having more and more pleasant experiences, and avoiding or getting rid of as much pleasant experience as I can. And you don't have to stop doing that, okay? If earlier today I wasn't feeling very well and I had a little bit of a headache, I don't know what was going on. So I went and took some aspirin and I feel a lot better. So I'm not saying we don't ever engage with the process to make changes, but it's this, as we get into the Four Noble Truths, sometimes people will talk about this, that there's this idea of that Buddhism is sometimes says desire, you're supposed to get rid of desire, or desire is bad, but it's actually not true. Desire is talked about a lot, wholesome desire in the ancient texts. But when desire gets so strong, it's like a craving. It's like a have to have and can't let go around. That's the one we want to let go of. And when that can soften and let go, and so we come to more of the happiness of a mind that's let go, that's not driven. It doesn't have to have, it's resting more peaceful with things. And it's actually leads to one way if I had to pick, if I had to pick one word to sum it up, I would use the word equanimity. And I'll come back to that in a few moments too. Uh, to me, that if the way I hold equanimity, it really is a nice way of encapsulating the idea of this liberation through non-clinging, that we don't throw anything away, we don't push it away. The only thing we're really letting go of is um, the, the being impelled forward by circumstances. So we start to find the liberation, the freedom of a mind that can actually find some peace in the midst of anything. I realize that's not always easy when our situation is challenging, but I've had certainly some experiences. I remember once I was, I think it was with my family, gone to the beach, and it was beautiful, and we were hanging out as the sun was setting. And I remember this very clearly, that I had a headache then. Towards the end of the day, I was tired. I had a headache. I think it had just been a lot of sun and wind or whatever. And I was hungry, and my blood sugar can kind of drop. I don't know if it's a little hypoglycemia or whatever. So I kind of had that feeling, and I was hungry. And actually in my body, I don't think I found any pleasantness. And I'm not making claims that this can happen all the time, but in that moment, I remember very clearly, I even commented to my wife that my mind was still it felt kind of in a good place. And I could allow all of that to be there. And it was a great opportunity. I appreciated it when it was there. You know, these things don't always stay, and this is why we have practice. But certainly in the moment, was able to see, you know, these experiences in the body were just coming and going. They happened to be unpleasant. Then there was the pleasantness of the sunset and being with my family at the beach. And it was kind of this mix of all of these things. And so it can be like that, where we really don't have to be completely at the effect of circumstances. And the balance, though, is the trick is we want to be able to find some inner balance, right? But not, again, to push life away. And in fact, many people find that if they're able to find the place of equanimity, at least more, then it actually helps them be more skillfully engaged. A lot of times it's harder to be engaged in life because we're caught in our likes and dislikes, and I'd like this person, I want that, and we kind of get in a battle with ourselves and others. And, you know, sometimes we can be our own worst enemies, right? And be quite judgmental on ourselves. What happens if that can kind of drop away some, and we can let ourselves be? It doesn't mean we still don't work with what needs to be worked with. Look at the places that are challenging or difficult in us, find ways to do healing, still be actively engaged in all the important aspects of life in our society and our communities, and all of the things that are important. But oftentimes we're able to be more present and make more wise decisions and more actively engaged when we're not busy, so busy being in reactivity. We can really, really be present and then make wise choices. And so a lot of people find that the more their mind is able to find an equanimity, it's easier for their hearts to stay open to various situations and other people, because they're less reactive. And they're actually able to meet and engage in more challenging situations without being so overwhelmed with things. So this is the point. We're not, all of these teachings on freeing our minds and having equanimity, they're not, again, I say this several times, but to emphasize, the point is not to throw away life or the world, or it's saying we're supposed to be disengaged. We each have to find our own way we relate to life and others and what we're engaged with. But that's an individual, our individual decisions and choice, because we're all different. But to the extent we're not caught in a reactivity with things, or able to really let things be, then we're able to make decisions and choices on how to move forward that come more from, I would say, more from a wisdom or a discernment, and less from a reactivity and a judging. And I mean judging not in the skillful sense, but in a negative sense of things, right? Um, so that's kind of the idea of all of these things. So what would life look like? That's the question for us. Could life look like if at least some more, to whatever, however far we want to take it, we're able to really flow through all the ups and downs of life, because the ups and downs are not going to stop. I don't think they've ever stopped for anyone. Even the Buddha, he was getting older and he used to complain about having a bad back, and he got into arguments with his relatives. It just doesn't quit, right? But we don't really know the mind of the Buddha, but ostensibly, hopefully, he was able to find a different way of being with it all. So we're here as, what's the John Kabat-Zinn book title? The one I always say I'm jealous of, I wish I had thought of it, Full Catastrophe Living. That's, as I've said many times, that's one of those books, when you hear the title, you actually don't have to buy the book, right? It's all right there. And another one of his books, Wherever You Go, There You Are. You put those two titles together, and I think you've kind of got a complete path right there. So there's a little system right there you can pick a little and hold that, right? And so we start to live with, I don't like full catastrophe, but the full-blown connection with ourselves in life, but hopefully not being entangled. We find a way to become more disentangled. And then the question is, well, what does that freedom, liberation look like? What would it feel like? What's the experience? And that's the path we're on. Those of us who have been Dharma practitioners, and maybe some of you who have not been longtime Dharma practitioners, but we know the experience of what happens as our meditation and other aspects of Dharma practice begin to bear fruit and become more alive. And then we actually know from the inside the experience. We don't have to make any grand claims. It's not that we have to be some kind of fully enlightened, transcendent being, floating above the ground in some cave on a mountain. We can still be ourselves as human beings, but we can still find that our lives can become profoundly transformed as the aliveness and awakeness of the Dharma can carry through. So these are just different ways of thinking about all the different methodologies or formulations that we're going to go through are meant in support of that. So just a few more things, and I'll stop, and we can open for discussion. We can hold in mind, for those of you who will be around for these talks, again, just it's not a right or wrong, because we're all different. Dharma practice, meditation itself, and Dharma practice is not one way. And this is really one of the important things. There are plenty of teachers out there who do teach one way, which is perfectly fine, because if you go to that teacher, he or she will say, this is my teaching. It's like this. You meditate this specific way. Here's the teachings. Here's the practices. Here are the forms that we use. And if you want to be with that teacher, that's the system you use. And if it's a fit for you, great. And no matter what the teaching or the system is, it will work well for some people, but it won't work for others. And so one of the things, and the Buddha spoke about this quite a bit, some of these lists that we're going to go through, there's one of the old suttas, discourses, in which the Buddha actually goes through and he says, okay, you see over here, he's telling someone, those people are practicing maybe 5 aggregates. Here they're teaching the Brahma Viharas. If you don't know what that is, we'll get into it. He's developing these beautiful qualities of the hearts. Here they're practicing maybe the 4 right endeavors. Here are the 5 aggregates. Here are the 4 noble truths, all these different forms. And he says, and they're all practicing according to which of those systems is the best fit for them. I'm paraphrasing. And then he goes on to teach, here, let me give you another one. And then that was a setup. And then as he goes through and he goes, I'm going to give you another one. He adds in another one. That's the teaching if you're interested on the Majjhima, on the Anapanasati Sutta. And so we want to keep that in mind. I think all of these different systems, it's good to have been exposed to them, and sometimes they can work together in funny ways or inform each other, so you can just keep open for that. But the main thing is take what works for you. You have to make it your own, and just let go of the rest and just know, well, maybe that's for someone else, fine, and it's not for me. So that's the important thing. And you couldn't do all of these practices uh, if you wanted to. I mean, you'd be foolish to try, but you couldn't do it. It's just too much, right? So we want to, in the end, take all of this and then let it all settle out and become very, very simple in what supports us in the liberation through non-clinging. And I include, when I say living with equanimity, which is another shorthand I use. Actually, a lot of these lists explicitly end, if you go through them in a progression, they end with, culminate in equanimity. So again, it just means having a balanced and open heart. So we're not closed off in ill will or hatred. We're accepting, we're right, open, loving, kind, empathetic, all of these things, and a sense of non-reactive presence. So that's kind of where we're heading. Yeah. Okay. So I'll pause here and we'll open it up in just a moment. Let me unspot myself and we'll open it up for discussion.